I still raise a little Cain when the boys left Alabama and weep. Talk some pretty women, Lord, I'm still right there with them, singing above the crowd and the noise.
Here we go, another Square Dance Callers Talking. Tonight, I have another person that I've never had the opportunity to meet and speak to until tonight, but I'm looking forward to it. He is in Knoxville, Tennessee. Tonight, I have Steve Kopman. How are you, sir?
Hey, Charlie. How are you doing?
Fine, sir. It is a pleasure to talk to you. We were talking a little bit before the podcast. We have run across each other, but not known it because we didn't speak or anything at Tennessee conventions and other places, I'm sure. But tonight, I want to talk about you and what you do with Square Dance Calling. You have a huge name in Square Dance Calling, and so I want to kind of get into that. So,
you know, Charlie, it's funny even that you bring that up, because when your father is considered the king of square dancing, he's written over, my dad Lee has written over 500 calls. And it sounds like a big leap, but when you think about Frank Sinatra and how amazing he was, and then his son comes into the business, he got a great voice, but he was always going to be in the shadow of his dad. When I was growing up and started to get asked to be on festivals, I knew that when I got on the first time, it was probably because my last name was Kopman.
okay.
But if I got asked back a second time, then it was because it was Steve. So it never, the first one was cool, you know, to call it Bakersfield or to call it Iwaska, to call it all these festivals around the country, around the world. And but it mattered more that I got asked back than that first one, because I knew having the last name Kopman just opened up so many doors for me in my career.
Now, with that being said, when did you start dancing?
So when I was growing up, my parents had a finished basement. And apparently when I was 5 years old, if they needed a person to fill in the square, they would wake me up and I'd have to come downstairs. And I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old granddaughter and a grandson. And I just can't imagine seeing her at 4 years old that, man, 1 year from now, I was square dancing. And there's kind of a funny story that goes with that. Because we talked earlier about your son, and I'm sure when he was born and he started to grow up a little bit, you said, now point to your nose, point to your ears. So it was never that way with me. It was always with my daughter. Which is your right hand? Which is your left hand?
Yep.
Which is your right foot? Which is your left foot? Because I knew that if ever she was going to be a square dancer, it really helped to know right from left.
Sure.
It's a game changer. And in fact, there's actually a funny story. When I moved to Knoxville in 1981, I was calling in Oak Ridge. And Oak Ridge was where the Manhattan Project, they were a big part. So a lot of those square dancers that were dancing to me were involved in the atom bomb, were bomb makers. And there was a call that I was teaching them, and I had said, all the boys face right, and one of the boys face left. And I said to him, John, it worries me that you're making bombs and you don't know your right from your left. Kind of scary when you think about it.
Yeah, it is.
So I made sure that my daughter absolutely, and my granddaughter, where's your right hand, where's your left? I do that same thing with her, just to make sure that if ever they wanted to get involved in square dancing, they were going to be good at it.
Now, does your daughter dance?
You know, it's the kind of thing where I know it's not cool to square dance. When she was younger, she actually went through lessons. I think she was maybe 10 years old, and one of her best friend girls took lessons. They danced together. And it was just so cute to see two 10-year-old girls dancing together. Charlie, this is actually fascinating. So she went through the beginner class and we were going through plus. At the same time, when the class ended, I had an advanced group that met right after. So my wife, Debbie, took our daughter home to go to bed. And when I came home, she was still up, and my daughter, 10 years old, said to me, "Dad, why did you show us how to do relay the deucing? We didn't even remember how to do coordinate." And I said, "Well, Mandy, there's just a number of calls we have to get through. We pretty much try and get through it in a school calendar year." And she said to me, "Dad, nobody takes square dance lessons to learn relay the deucing." And I thought, son of a gun, 10 years old. And I wish all callers could understand the importance of that. When it's so hard to get people to take square dance lessons, what we do, they don't. When people think of square dancing, I think they still think of Virginia Reel, Appalachian, or contra dancing. That's what they think of square dancing. They don't know we're dancing to Michael Jackson Thriller, or Please Don't Stop the Music. They don't know we're calling to that kind of stuff. And to me, it's a shame that we haven't figured out, as the numbers kept going down, down, down. Before COVID, we had major problems.
Yeah.
It's a sin that we haven't accepted the problems that we have in square dancing. And to get on a soapbox for me, most of the dancers that, when you're calling and you're giving lessons, they're in their 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And we're expecting people in their 70s to learn a foreign language, square dancing. They're not talking right and left grand and grand square when they're not at a square dance. So we're asking people in their 70s to learn this foreign language and conversationally speak it, but they don't know what order we're going to throw out.
Mm-hmm.
And we expect them to learn it in 8 or 9 months. It's unrealistic.
Yeah.
And so we lose so many people along the way in classes. And you think back, man, what happened to the bunch of people that were there the first couple of nights? And here we are pushing, because the main level in square dancing is relay the deucing and ping pong circulate, load the boat, it's plus level. Mm-hmm. And so to get people into what is the acceptable, most popular level in square dancing, we're forcing so much at them, and I hate that. That.
Okay. That does make a lot of sense. I just finished my first class with my club. We went from beginning to end just through mainstream, and we've started plus. We've just about completed plus. And I understand that. And, you can see that, because I had a couple of younger people that, there's nothing you can't give them that they don't pick up on and get moving. But once there's a barrier somewhere around mid to late 50s, 60s, that, just like you said, I can do spin chain through 3 nights in a row, and they are still not going to make it every time.
Oh my God, Charlie. So let me take that one step further.
Okay.
In September, started a beginner class, and we have 1 call left on the mainstream. We're about to finish mainstream next week. I saved it to the end, and it spin chain through. And it absolutely, pardon my French, pisses me off that I'm going to spend not 1 week showing them spin chain through, but 2 and 3 weeks after that, we're going to review it. And that's about the last time they're ever going to hear it. And it bugs the heck out of me that we've had lists for over 40 years. Well, if dancers 40 years later can't spin chain through, and they can't spin chain the gears, you'll lose half the floor, if you're lucky. If they can't do those calls, take them off the list. Who cares? They didn't learn do-si-do to learn spin chain through or spin chain the gears or anything else for that matter. But if they can't do it 40 years later, accept it. Move on.
And it doesn't help. And I understand. I didn't do it because of this, but I've taken classes. I've angeled for other people, and they will tell them, "Hey, I'm going to teach y'all something tonight. You'll never hear it again. You're not going to do it at a dance, and it's spin chain through or something, or spin chain the gears." And some people are just okay with it, but others are like, "Then why are we doing this? Why are you teaching it if I'm never going to do it again?" So I make a point with my club. I will call it once a dance somewhere, and so they're proficient at it for the most part. But yeah, you go to some places and they're like, "Hey, I'm going to teach you this. You're never going to do it again, but I'm going to teach it." Why?
So Charlie, when you go to a visiting club to call, do you call spin chain through?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. And that's, how crazy is that?
Yep. I don't.
And I just feel like, why haven't we, 40 years, maybe 50 years of the list, after all that, if you're calling it for your own club to make a point, hey, I put the time in to teach it and you've taken the time to learn it, let's at least make you do it once a night. But then they're not getting it anywhere else.
Yep.
So anyway.
Yep. And just like you said, if I'm doing a guest tip or I'm doing a dance for a club that I don't normally call it, I don't want to go in there and break down a floor when I can do other stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to approach it that way.
Yeah.
But the people that I kind of take a little pride in the handful that I've taught now, since I've only had a couple of classes that I've taught, that they can go. And if somebody were to drop that on them, they'd make it through. Now, so a little pride there. I try and say, "Hey, these are my dancers. Y'all go out there and show them what you can do."
Hey, Charlie,
if they ask you who taught, make sure you say Charlie Petrie. So,
can I give you a creative idea to change it up just a little bit?
Absolutely.
Okay. So one of the fun things that if I'm calling and I'm kind of messing with advanced dancers or even challenge dancers, and I'll have them in a two-face line, and I'll say, begin with a partner trade and do a spin chain through. So instead of trading by the right hand or unless it's a left-hand way, they do a partner trade and then the centers cast 3, the center 2 trade, cast off 3. Even if you're a challenge dancer, that's whoa, never thought about that. And so it can make it at least a little bit interesting, even for the higher levels, if you kind of put a little sizzle on it just to make it a little bit different. There's another thing, if you've never done this, where you can say from an ocean wave, replace the first part with a scoot back and spin chain through. So everybody does a scoot back, then the center 2 cast 3/4, the center 2 trade, cast 3/4. Again, just a little bit different. And I think if all callers had Lee Kopman as a mentor and got to grow up with him for 60 years as a dad, and you're forced into why are you doing the same stuff? Why not be different? And so you're forced to kind of be a little bit creative. And I don't know that we would need all the relay Viducis and all those other calls if you could take those basic and mainstream calls and tweak them a little bit. Say calling square through 2.5.
Right.
You almost never hear that. But it gets their attention. And at your dances, do you have angels that come and support your beginner class?
Yes, sir. We sure do.
So one of the things by replace the first part of a spin chain through with a swing through or a scoot back or a circulate. Those angels are going to enjoy that dance way more than they expected. And it's still obtainable for the beginner class. It's still within their abilities and stuff like that. Can I tell you a funny story?
Absolutely.
I was calling at the national convention in Salt Lake City a long time ago. And I had a half hour of advance. And my mom and dad were in the hall. And I get up to call my first tip. Charlie, I thought it was one of the best tips I had ever called. It was something like square through 2.5 and spin the top, but interrupt after the first part with a blah, blah, blah. And my dad, after the first tip, he comes practically running up to the stage, and I'm walking down. And he said, "How do you think you did?" I said, "Oh, Dad, did you see what they were doing out there?" He said to me, "I thought that was the worst tip I've ever heard you call." And I'm like, what? There's 60, 75 squares on the floor here. And he's telling me it's the worst tip I ever did. He said, "Do you know why?" I said, "No, I thought it was great." And he said, a lot of these people, they don't even have live callers. They're dancing to tapes. They're dancing to recordings. They practice all year to be able to execute at the national convention. He said, "How many advance calls did you actually call in that tip?" I said, "I don't know, 7 or 8. He said, "You called 5. He was counting. And he tells the same story too. Well, not anymore, he's passed, but he would tell the same story. He said, the next tip, he said, "I think my son called every advance call on the list after that. By golly, Charlie, I don't think I'll have one damn call."
Wow.
Like, I'm not calling 2 of the worst tips my father's ever heard me call. So it's funny because it made such an impression on me. When I'm on festivals and I got an hour off, or I walk into a hall and the caller is still calling before me, I listen, and I really listen to see how many of the calls at that level, especially advanced, especially challenged, are they using,
Okay.
so that the dancers really get a chance to practice. And it really was a kind of a deal breaker for me as a caller. We had talked a little bit earlier about Sandy Bryant, where because she was getting bored when she was calling, so she was listening to a basketball game while she was calling.
Yeah.
I don't know how she could do that, but if anybody can, Sandy can. One of my games that I like to play mentally is how many calls can I stack in a row where it still has flow, where it's still interesting. How many calls in a row can I do at that level? And it's just a fun game. But every time when I do this and I think about it, I'm just so blessed to have the king of choreography as a dad growing up. I don't think about choreography. When I get up on stage to call, it just comes out. He told me, he said when I was 7 years old, he and I would drive in the car together, and he would say, "Steve, if the head's square through 4 and do a right and left through, give me 3 steps to get to your corner." I'm 7. I'm barely making full sentences. And he's mentally giving me choreography. And when I share these stories, like at callers schools and callers clinics and things, the one thing I tell them was, if I had a hard time getting to the corner in 3 steps, 4 steps, my dad would write a new call to make it easier on me. So I said, unfortunately, I was a slow learner, so you needed 500 calls from him to be able to resolve the squares easily. Anyway, just
That's
a fun story.
That is great. Yeah, like I said, since we'd never met, but it's been a few years now. I used to get a magazine. I forget what it's called. I think a gentleman out of Florida put it out, and y'all had Kopman's Corner in it. And it would have a whole bunch of choreography.
American
and I would
Square
sit
Dance
down.
Magazine.
What was it?
American Square Dance Magazine.
That's exactly what it was. And I would sit down, and I was just starting out with my calling and all that. and I would try and work out some of those things with checkers, and I was like, I have no idea what this is, because it was just it was so different from your right and left through, veer left, Ferris wheel, centers pass through, that type of thing. But so I got a lot out of that, but I just thought, how will I ever get to this level reading Kopman's corner? So
Charlie, I got to tell you a great story about that too.
yeah, go ahead.
So when I first got approached to do this choreography thing for American Square Dance magazine, I'm working a full-time job. My dad, he had retired from teaching. He was calling full-time.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, hey, Dad, I really don't have time to do this every month. But how about you and we alternate months. You do 6 months, I do 6 months. So he kind of hemmed and he said, Steve, I'm writing C4 for Kirkwood coming up and challenge conventions coming up. And I said, Dad, how long does it take you to write 15 sequences of plus, for crying out loud, in the way you like to deliver it? So he said, okay, I'll do it. So I write the first month and I emailed Dad and I said, hey, Dad, it's your turn to write. He goes, Steve, I'm sorry, I don't have the time to do this month. He said, would you mind doing it? I said, no, sure, it's easy to do. So I do the second month. I do the third month because we're supposed to do every other one. On the fourth month, I said, hey, Dad, it's your turn. He said, Steve, I'm writing for the challenge convention. I just don't have time. I said, okay, I'll do it. Well, this went on for 12 years. He somewhere in the middle of the 12 years, because I bugged him every freaking month, somewhere in the middle of the 12 years, he wrote 15 sequences and sent it to me. I'm like, oh crap, nobody's going to be able to do this. This is impossible. Yeah. So I decided not to use it. It was like, okay, wait a minute. This is so here's the best part. I was asked to do a 1-hour callers clinic at the Wasca Festival. So Saturday morning, I go in, a bunch of callers, there are 30 callers there. And at the end, one of the callers came up and said to me, man, we love yours and your dad's choreography in American Square Dance magazine, Kopman's Corner. He said, and I think we figured out which ones you write and which one your dad writes. And I'm like, well, you're amazing. I never, if he listens to this, he's going to be embarrassed, but I never told him that. Sorry, but I've actually written every single one of them.
No kidding. Oh my gosh, that's great.
And I laughed. I thought it's kind of mind over matter. I knew when he passed, and of course I've continued writing the American Square Dance magazine, Kopman's Choreo. I know there's people out there that are looking at it saying, oh, it's just not as good. Now that Lee's gone,
he's not writing it. Oh my gosh. Oh, I wish I still had some of those magazines. I mean, it's been a few. It was way before COVID. I signed up at one convention, whether it be a national or wherever. And so I got it for a few years, but yeah.
Buddy Weaver took it over last year, and he invited me to continue writing. And so it's the old ones, unless somebody happens to have the right. American Square Dance magazine, or I think even Sets in Order before that.
Sets in Order.
But they're still available, but just in the new form with Buddy Weaver, American Square Dance magazine.
Now, when we were talking beforehand, you talked about trips to Japan and all that. Where have you called all over the world? And you just want to throw out some of the places you've been?
So the first place that I called was in Germany. My dad and I got booked for a festival out there, and I didn't know what to expect, and it was crazy. There's no chairs in the hall. Mm-hmm. They sell to the maximum amount of space, and there's no chairs. And everybody there is 25, 30, 35 years old. So at the end of the first tip, they just as a collective group, back like we did in the old days, everybody applauds for the caller, thunderous applause. And then they just turn around and walk into the next square and wait. So where we if we typically do 10-minute tip, 5-minute break, 10-minute tip, 5-minute break. It's 1-minute break because they're just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And kind of like the Mercedes-Benz, the vehicles are so meticulously built, rack and pinion steering. They dance that same way. There's no helpful hints. There's no words that they want to hear,
Right.
other than the calls. And they do it every single position you can possibly imagine. They've done it. But here's one of the reasons. They teach square dancing the way we're supposed to teach in the United States. They spend a year on basics, and then the next year, mainstream. And then the next year, if they move on to plus. So if you're 25 and 30-year-old and you're limited to up to Ferris wheel, by golly, as a caller, the German callers, they better be brilliant and creative in how they present it to keep those kids interested in square dancing. So that's the way we were supposed to do it here.
Yeah.
But as we talked about earlier, we rush them into plus. They do it the way we're supposed to, and you end up with amazing dancers. I got a funny story.
Yeah.
The second time I went to Germany, I was by myself, and had to go to the bathroom, and it just so happens the bathrooms were downstairs. So I was walking down the stairs, and there happened to be a girl that was walking next to me, and we got to the bottom of the stairs, and there were two names on the doors for the bathroom, Damen and Herren. So I'm looking, and she realizes I don't know German, and so but I grew up in New York, so I'm looking at Damen, Herren, Damen. This is the men's room. So I start to walk toward the Damen room, and she just took me and pushed me to the other one. And I said, "Man, I hope you know what's going on in my head." And sure enough, I went in there. There was a urinal, and I was in the right bathroom. I tell a lot of bathroom stories.
Okay, nothing wrong with that. That's good stuff. I have not gone overseas for anything like that yet. I don't know if that day will ever come. But yeah, I've heard a few stories about that, especially Japan and Germany and stuff like that. So
now, of all the places that I've called, nothing compares to Japan for me.
Yeah.
And when you ask callers, Charlie, when you ask your callers, I'll bet most of them say that. I'll give you a couple of neat stories.
Yeah.
The first time I went over there with there were 3 other ESP callers, Craig Rowe, Bobby Newman, and of course Elmer Sheffield and me. So this is kind of a neat story. When I first got up to call, we all called together. They had all been there before. This was my first time. So after the tip, they said, "Steve, why don't you do the next tip by yourself, because they've never heard you call." So I get up and I'm calling heads, left square through 4, left touch or quarter, centers tray, do a left spin chain and exchange the gears. There's 25 squares on the floor, 100% accuracy. I'm calling, and I say, heads pass through, heads turn around, nobody moved. I'm like, what the hell? So when I got off the stage, Bobby Newman came up. He said, "Do you know what happened?" I said, "No." He said, "None of these people speak English. Turn around is a slang for you turn back." Now, Charlie, if you're working on the force and you're running after a criminal and you say, "Hey, turn around," he's going to know exactly what you. He may not do it, but he's going to know what to do. in America, dancers are way better at turning around than you turn back. They don't usually go 180 degrees. So turn around is kind of a better way to get success.
Sure.
And I realized at that point that I had to stick to caller lab calls only. And there's another place you can't help because most don't speak English. So when you do helpful hints, it just confuses them because they're trying to listen to the calls, and that other stuff doesn't they don't need the help.
Mhm.
But so wait, I got to tell you the
Yeah,
best.
no, man.
So why do callers love calling in Japan? Because they dance great in Germany, they dance great in Denmark, they dance great in England, Sweden, phenomenal dancers all over the world. The four callers and their wives got there Thursday night and they set up a private party just for the callers, and Mrs. Yamaguchi, who hired us, and a woman who spoke wonderful English. They had, oh my God, the food was amazing, unbelievable. And they had lots of beer for the callers. Well, Debbie and I, we weren't really beer drinkers at the time. And so in broken English, Mrs. Yamaguchi had said, no beer? And I just kind of joked. I said, no, I like scotch. Didn't think anything of it. So Friday night, we called the dance, the four ESP callers. And after the dance, all of the dancers stayed for an after party. And they brought food and drinks, and they had tables for everybody. And they even had a Japanese country western band with a stand-up bass and fiddle. It was so much fun. And we sang, country songs. Well, remember, we have interpreters. The interpreter said, Steve, Mrs. Yamaguchi wants you and Debbie, they want you to go to each table and let me interpret. They want to show their appreciation, how happy they are that you've come over to call for them. So I go to the first table, Charlie, there's a 15-year-old Chivas Regal bottle of scotch, brand new, 15, 20 years old. So they open it up, pour the drink, and I'm like, oh my God, what are the chances?
Yeah.
Have a drink, go to the next table. Brand new bottle, Chivas Regal scotch, open up the bottle, pour me a drink. By the third table of Chivas Regal opening up the bottle, I realized Mrs. Yamaguchi said that Steve likes to drink scotch. So they went out of their way. Well, by the fourth table, I'm like, I can feel my cheeks. And I knew there was going to be more bottles ahead. So it was just kind of a tiny little, like a wine tasting almost. Anyway, sorry. But that's why the callers love Japan. That's the perfect example. You feel like a rock star when you go over there, Charlie. The women come up with Sharpie pens and they want you to sign their skirts. When they buy CDs, they want you to sign the CDs. Debbie, somebody was fanning themselves, and Debbie was just being polite and best way she could get her point across, said to them, oh, I love your fan. And the woman just gave her the fan. So when Debbie told me the story, I said, you should have found out what kind of car she drives. Maybe really could get out of
my gosh.
ahead.
That's a great story.
Sorry.
We had talked, there's another Japan story I want you to tell in just a second. But yet somebody, when you're talking about the helper words and all that, I can't remember who it was. One of my podcasts we were talking about, and they said that they were calling along doing plus, and they said, put her in the lead Dixie style. And the whole floor stopped and looked at them. And they were like, what did I do? And I can't remember who that was, but they said they don't know what put her in the lead means.
Yeah.
And
it confuses them.
Mm-hmm.
What's the real call and what's the bingo, 6
Mm-hmm.
penny high, bing, take a little bigger red eye. What's that part? And so when I listen to recordings of when I've been to Japan, in some ways it almost sounds like I'm angry because it's heads past the ocean,
Mhm.
ping pong circulate, recycle. It's very different than the way we call any place else in the world. That one in particular, you have to be careful, but it's worth it.
Absolutely. We talked early, and I didn't know going in how close you and Tim Mariner were. And so we had talked about Tim, and we'll talk about him some more in a minute. But Tim has a song that he recorded, Volcano. And for the callers out there, a lot of people will know it ends with a conga line. Tell me your Japan story about Volcano.
Yeah, it's not going to be funny to you anymore because you've never heard it.
No, it's good.
But it reminds you, let me back up a little bit. When I've called in England and I've called in Sweden and I've called in Germany, it's kind of easy after a while to forget where you are because everybody looks like us. When you're calling in Japan and there's 25 squares of Japanese dancers and probably 70% are women, and you're trying to keep up with whose partner is who. When the women dance the man's part, they put a sash on. So, but you never forget how far away you are from home when you're calling in Japan, just because it's different. So I stole this from Tim, and I know you did too, the song Volcano, and it ends with everybody walking in single file. We tell the dancers, put your hands on the shoulder of the one in front of you. Lady number one, break out in a conga line. Now, everybody here knows what a conga line is. No big deal. I go to put the song on, and I'm like, oh, crap. The big finish, it's going to be horrendous. And so I have an interpreter, and she's got a wireless mic. And I know from my experiences being over there is if I'm going to do something different, then I say, Martha, turn your mic on. And she knows that I'm going to have to explain something. So before I did the singing call, we had to explain what put your hands on the one in front of you means. And then lady number one, break out in a conga line, what that means. So they did it a couple of seconds. And now I'm doing the singing call. Now, unlike in America, a lot of people don't know the ending. So it's fun. And if you do know the ending, it's still so cool. Thank you, Tim Mariner. So we get to the end, and it was like the anticipation. I wondered if it would live up to, oh my God. They went and formed, we had 25 squares sold out. They formed like the biggest, giantest conga line in the room, and we're so proud of because they didn't know what a conga line was. So the Japanese callers didn't know what a conga line was to explain it to them. Oh my goodness, it was such a hit. And now when I go back, they ask for it, Volcano.
Oh, that's great. I love that story.
There was there's a plant in Maryville, and there over the years, some of the Japanese dancers or callers have come to work at this plant, and this one caller, great caller, loved in Japan. His name is Max. Max would come to my dances, and then he'd go to Denso, which is the name of the company. So I learned, not in the beginning, you never told me, but I learned from my interpreter that Max was a caller. I'm like, what? He never said anything. So it was Christmas time, and I said, hey, Max, do a singing call for the group. And Max, he understood English great. So Max comes up, he puts the singing call on, he's singing, he says, do an Alaman left, weave the ring, and then he says, put your hands in the air and crap to the beat. Oh my God. There was not a dry eye in the house. We were laughing so hard from that. It was great, just great. So.
Oh my gosh, that's good. I know you've got a lot of stories from going over, and that's what this podcast is about, is stories. But staying on the Tim Mariner part of it, you were telling me a story. The first time you met Tim, y'all did a singing call together, and y'all just blended, and you felt like y'all been doing it for 50 years. Tell me the song, the story about the balloons.
So Tim and I were calling at the Wasca Festival, Washington, D.C. And we used to do this Alvin and the Chipmunk song. And we start to do the singing call, and I look behind me, and there's balloons blown up on the wall. And I thought, wait a minute, we're doing Alvin and the Chipmunks. How cool would it be to sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks? So I grab a balloon, I give one to him. The relationship we had was magical. We didn't discuss things, they just happened. And I know Charlie is a caller. One of the biggest thrills in my life in all of the years I've called and is the spontaneity with callers, whether it's Tommy Miller, Tim Mariner, Ron Libby, Shoemake, Bauer, where there's nothing discussed. There's not, here's how we're going to phrase it. Here's, you take the high part, I'll take, it's not that. And when it comes together while you're calling in front of all of those squares, it's just magical. It's hard to describe that amazing spontaneity, that feeling. Well, Tim, it's like he could read my mind. So while he's starting the singing call, I give him the balloon, and he's like, oh my God, cool. So we're biting into the balloon so we can suck out the helium. And now we're calling, sounding like Alvin and the Chipmunks. And of course, we didn't plan this. So we are laughing till we're crying. And the dancers, they can hear, wait a minute, this is not Tim Mariner sounding. Maybe it sounds a little bit like Steve Kopman sounding like Alvin and the Chipmunks, but definitely not Tim Mariner. And they look up, and we're still holding some of the balloons sucking in the air, and they were in on the joke. Well, a couple of months later, Tim and I were calling together in July in Baltimore, and sure enough, we're in the main hall. Place is full. There's balloons, and I said, Tim, that was so much fun. We have to do this again. So I grabbed 2 balloons while we're starting the singing call. I give it to him. I take one. We bite into it. We suck out the air from the balloon, and we start to call, and we sound normal. And we realized our eyes got like this big, and we're like, oh crap, they didn't blow these up with helium. It was a human being that blew them up, and we just sucked in somebody else's carbon dioxide. Oh, and now Tim and I, again, we're laughing till we're crying, but the dancers don't understand why.
Right.
So we shared that, hey, when we were together a couple months ago, and they were like, "Ooh, God, that's gross." Anyway, so
oh no, that's good. That's a good story.
Such a fun story.
Out of all those places you've been around the world and all that, do any venues stand out to you? Dance halls for the floor, the sound, anything like that, the surroundings?
Yeah, there's a couple of places. You mentioned before we started recording that Pride in North Carolina. They have got Yamaha speakers, and it makes me sound like Ken Bauer. And anything that can make me sound like Bauer, but the problem is they weigh like 2,000 pounds or something. So as much as I would like to take them on the road with me, I physically couldn't do it. But that's a great hall for sound. Just amazing. Kirkwood. Have you ever been to Kirkwood Lodge?
I have not. Kirkwood.
It's no longer a square dance resort like it was for years. And boy, anybody called it Kirkwood. You knew you made it in the business. If you were on the Wasca Festival, you knew it was like the Golden Globe Awards. It was like winning the Grammys. And if you were invited to call at Kirkwood Lodge in Missouri, it was just spectacular. And the sound, it reminded me of Pride Resort, that just super wooden floor,
Yeah.
crisp sound. You never heard nobody ever came up and said, I couldn't understand you.
Yeah.
You know, it was just great.
Yeah, as long as I've known Tony, and I just got to meet Jerry probably a year before he passed away. I had never been until last year, well, about a year and a half ago. And yeah, just a great setup, good little hall there. Love it. And that's a great part. I've been through Cherokee, North Carolina, and Waynesville, and wherever I forget the exact town it's in, but I've been through there a ton of times traveling. But had no idea. So it's a fantastic place over
Probably,
there.
did you ever hear Jerry do Fisherman's Luck? Did you ever hear him do
I
that?
never heard him do Fisherman's Luck. Did not.
Have you ever heard any callers do it, where the words are like a machine gun?
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So somebody had told me that they heard Jerry do the singing call called Fisherman's Luck. I'd never heard of it. And they said, hey, I've got a recording of it. Do you want to hear it? I said, yeah, sure. And back when we were talking earlier, it was on a cassette tape. So I'm playing it. I'm like, oh my God, the words, where do you breathe?
Mhm.
I could never hear where we took a breath in 3.5 minutes. And I thought, man, I would love to steal this like I stole Volcano from Tim Aaron. I always steal from the best, only the best. And remind me to tell you a funny story about that too.
Okay.
So I start to practice it and I thought, whoa, I think if Jerry does this way all the time, again, I never heard him do it live, but there's not really much, you can't change it up much. There's only one way to do it, like a machine gun. So I started to do the harmony to Jerry's doing Fisherman's Luck. And Tony and Jerry and I were doing a festival in St. Louis, and there were 2 halls, and Jerry was in the plus hall, and I went in there, and he said, "Hey, come on up, let's do a tip." So we do the patter, and he said, "What do you want to do for singer?" I said, "Fisherman's Luck," and he's like, "Yeah, right." I said, "No, do it." I said, "But do it the way you always do it. Pretend I'm not here." And from the very first word to the last word, everything was in harmony. Jerry did it the way he always did it, which is insane. And because I had practiced and practiced, well, about 2 or 3 words into it, Jerry's eyes lit up like, whoa, wasn't expecting something like that. It was so thrilling. It was fun to kind of catch him by surprise too. And so we did it there. And then the next hour I was calling and he was off, and he came in, he says, "We're doing this again." So we did it again. It wasn't as much fun the second time because by then the element of surprise for Jerry was gone. But man, that was one of the highlights of my calling was that experience with Jerry. One of my lowest experiences was also involved Jerry's story.
What's that?
I was calling at a national convention. I think it was Salt Lake City. And at the national conventions, you get a little slip with your calling spots on it ahead of time. So I knew what my spots were. And I get to the Salt Lake City and I get the program book and I look at it and I see I'm in the plus hall, which I knew, and I'm following story. And I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be horrible. So I call my mom and dad, and my dad picks up the phone. He goes, "I know why you're calling." I said, "Why?" He goes, "I saw the program book too." So I'm a wreck leading up to my plus spot following Jerry's story. So at the national conventions, you have to get there a half hour before and sign in. So I get there probably 45 minutes early. And the hall was massive. It easily could have held 200 squares. And there were maybe 25, 30 squares 45 minutes before. But what I kept noticing is squares of people kept running into the hall, running into the hall. And I'm like, oh my God, is this what I'm thinking? That they're all running in to dance to Story. And sure enough, Jerry goes up on stage. I'm just nervous, and I really get nervous to call. I can count maybe 2 times. I'm a nervous wreck knowing how great he is. He's really the Garth Brooks of square dancing. So Jerry gets up and he picks up the mic and he looks out at the crowd. The place is buzzing, buzzing. The energy level is through the roof. All these people are running in to dance 1 10-minute tip to this guy. Jerry just looks at him and goes, howdy. And the crowd yells back, howdy. That wasn't enough for Jerry. He wanted it louder. So he said it again, howdy. And now they're screaming. Before he even said bow to your partner, they were this high off the ground. They were screaming for Story. And I thought, it can't get any better than this. It got better and better. I was afraid to look down at my chest because I thought I would see my heart pounding.
Oh my gosh.
Charlie, I don't get nervous to call. So this by itself was like, what is this that's going on? So he finishes his tip. People, first of all, and he called fast. And so as soon as he finished, as quick as all those people were running into the hall, they were running out of the hall to catch their breath, get something to drink, find somebody else to call. So I think when I went up there to the stage, here I was, this nervous wreck. There probably weren't 10 squares on the floor from 200 where Jerry was there. So it was a very humbling experience.
Sure.
It was something I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, to feel what I was feeling. And there was no reason to worry about it. The hall emptied when Jerry finished calling. And it was amazing. So.
And he seemed like a great guy. Like I said, I talked to him at a GSI school for a couple of days the year before he passed. So, yeah, but I've watched a ton, quite a bit of his stuff on YouTube. Him and Tony doing Little Devil is about as good a thing.
I could watch that every day.
It's about as good a thing as I've ever seen. It's just amazing when somebody has that kind of connection. I would have loved to have seen you and Tim, back then. Oh my gosh.
Charlie, I'll tell you what.
Stories, great stories.
I laugh when I love working with almost every caller. There's very few that I've walked away and just didn't love the experience. The easiest one to work with was my dad, because everything I learned growing up was from him. I told you that, he would say, head square 3 4, right and left through, give me 3 steps to get to your corner. So when we would get up to call together over the years at different weekends and festivals, and it was cool because I would work with him in England one weekend, and then the next weekend we were in Las Vegas together, and then the next weekend we were in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, calling together, and massive crowds. And although he was in New York and I was in Knoxville, Tennessee, I saw him more than if I probably lived in New York with him. So when we would get up and we would call, and then we would alternate calls, he would say, heads past the ocean, and I would say extend, and he would say explode the wave, and I'd say chase right. And there was never, ever a moment, not a split second of hesitation or bad body flow. It was as if there was one person calling only on the stage. It was so easy to work with him. And I used to laugh when he and I would do caller schools together. He's my dad, it's not a big deal. Well, callers would come in and practically genuflect when they saw him. And at the end of the schools, we'd always go around the room and say, tell me something you liked and something you didn't like about the school so we can get better the next time we do it. Never, ever, ever was there a time where a caller, two callers didn't say, if only Mr. Kopman could put a bag over his head so it wouldn't be as intimidating
Sure.
to call in front of him. I'm like, it's just that. What's the big deal? And I knew when they were saying Mr. Kopman, they sure as hell weren't talking about me, right? So it was amazing to me because to me, he was just dad. But I also never lost track of the impact he's made on square dancing. And the way I equate it to people is, if golf didn't have Arnold Palmer or Tiger Woods and baseball didn't have Babe Ruth, it may have taken a couple of years longer, but it would have evolved to where it was today. If square dancing didn't have Lee Kopman, there wouldn't be 10 levels of square dancing. You don't need it. You wouldn't have 500 calls to have to worry about. So whether for good or for bad, it was amazing the impact he made on the activity. And it was the reason why I'm living in Knoxville was I knew growing up, if I was going to be successful as a caller, I couldn't do it in the same town that my dad was in.
Sure.
Charlie, we talked every day on the phone. He called me every day. He'd call me and we'd talk. And then an hour later, he'd call me. He said, what's new? I'm like, Dad, we just talked an hour ago. I'm at work. He said, well, your mom's in shopping. I had a little time, so I thought I'd give you a call. There wasn't a day that we didn't talk. And we never talked about sports. Mm-hmm. I was a Met fan. He was a diehard Yankee fan. We never talked sports. We only talked choreography. And he would, kind of a neat story that maybe people don't know, but when I've got a sister and she's 4 years younger. Well, growing up, when my dad was writing all these calls, they were both, my mom was a teacher and my dad was a teacher. And then my dad would call every night of the week. So we always had dinner together as a family. And my dad had little checkers. They were round. And couple number one had ones, and couple number twos had twos. And so he moved the checkers. So he would come to the dinner table almost every night. And he'd say, hey, I've got an idea for a call, but I don't have a name for it. And here's what I want to do. Or he'd say, I've got a really neat name for a call, but I can't figure out what to do with it. So our family would kind of converse on suggestion and things that kind of move things along. You don't know this call. There's a call on the C2 list called PRESS, P-R-E-S-S. Well, my dad loved this name, PRESS, for some reason. It was like, hey, I've got this idea. I think I'm going to call it PRESS. Well, it turned out that it's coordinate. And we watched him move the checkers and we were like, that doesn't look like something you'd want to call press. You got to have more of a flowing call. And so we came up with coordinate. This happened 3 or 4 calls that linear cycle. Here, I think we should call this press. And a press was, in whatever formation you're in, circulate one position straight ahead. Now, at the challenge level, it gives you weird formations to do that. So it's even a little bit hard to conceptualize. Mm-hmm. You would never do this at Main Street. So a press is to move one position straight ahead. Well, after 3, 4, 5 calls, he said, hey, I've got this idea for a call which gives you all different kinds of neat formation endings. He said, what do you think what do you think would be a good name? And my sister and my mom and I, just without thinking, said press. And sure enough, it became press. It was like, finally, we can get that out of his system. He loved that name.
When I was teaching and learning and everything else, and when I try and explain square dancing to people I work with or whatever, because they give me a hard time, make fun of me on occasion because they know how much I do it. Um, I say some of the calls are self-explanatory. It's a different language, but walk and dodge. If you know what you're talking about, it only takes once or twice to teach that or show it because it's walk and you're dodging. Some of them, and I don't know the calls. I know he came up with 500. A lot of them. Where did someone like load the boat, relay the doocy? Where does that come from? Or any of those anything like cast a shadow? Because I took advanced.
Yeah, he wrote Cast a Shadow. Let me give you a great example. Recycle, because everybody knows recycle, right? So we had this idea for a call, couldn't figure out a name, and he and my mom were driving home for a dance, and they were behind a recycling truck, and it said something recycle your clean garbage, and he saw that and he said, "Well, man, that'd be a good name for a call, recycle." He saw a helicopter one day in the sky, and he had this idea of what became a C1 call called rotary spin. And it came because of seeing the rotary blades on the helicopter. So some of the calls after 200, 300, 400, there's no rhyme or reason to it. You just got to come up with a follow the yellow brick road, or a lot of it's not it's interesting that, to your point, I wish there were more calls like walk and dodge that were very descriptive, that would make it easier for dancers, so that every time, once we had swing through, turn half by the right, then by the left, it would have been great, instead of spin the top, to call it swing the top, or instead of relay the doocy, swing the doocy, so that once dancers learned the idea of every time you hear swing, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to turn half. It would have been great had we had that kind of logic back in the day when all these calls were coming out, but it just didn't work out that way.
And that's the same way when you're teaching it, when you're saying stuff like that, and I tell them, hey, this one's pretty much self-explanatory, touch a quarter, and you show them, give them the definition, everything else, and you're touching, you're turning a quarter, and for whatever reason, I've taken advanced lessons a couple of times, but cast a shadow, I was like, where does this come from?
So when you think about the cast a shadow, and by the way, when I'm teaching calls, I always, when I teach scoot back, when I teach recycle, I always coordinate, chase right. I always make it a point to tell them that my dad wrote that call, because nobody else can say that, right?
Right.
The only one that has that privilege, number one. Number two, I think it gives them the impact of how long I've been in the activity. Is that, man, we don't know who you are, Steve, but your dad must have been pretty important to have written all these calls. And of course, there's always people that come like, how many calls did you write? And I'll say, well, I wrote 3. What list are they in? Well, that's why I only wrote 3. They're not on any list. We tried them, it didn't work out. And I learned early on. Oh, I've got a good story about that too, if you want.
Yeah.
So when I was growing, all I knew was my dad. You only know what you know. But my idol growing up was Kip Garvey. Do you know who Kip is?
I do know Kip. I finally met him. I had a podcast with him. Great guy. Go ahead.
Oh my God, unbelievable. Not only is he a great choreographer, great singer, great joke teller, unbelievable. He was my idol growing up. He lived in Massachusetts at the time. Oh, I wanted to be just like Kip. Here I have the most famous choreographer on the planet. I wanted to be like Kip. So my dad and Kip were calling a weekend together, and I went. And I was just a kid. I was probably 13, 14 years old. And my dad had me do a tip, and I did my tip, and Kip came running up to me after I could hardly speak. I mean, this is my idol who's coming up to talk to me. And he said, Steve, that was amazing what you just did. I'm like, hey, I grew up with this. I only know what I know. So he said, can I make a suggestion? I'm like, yeah, of course. He said, why don't you find out what your dad's weaknesses are. My dad wasn't known for having a good singing voice. He also was a very fast teacher. He would teach something from one position, and because he saw it so clearly, he would just start calling it from all the positions. Well, dancers they didn't see it like dad did. So Kip said, take your dad's weaknesses and work on that, because you don't have to think about choreography. It comes out effortlessly. And so when your idol tells you what to do, and because I didn't have to do a lot of work on being a square dance caller, because choreography for most people is the hardest thing, and for me it was the easiest thing. So I worked on singing calls, and Kip, a couple of months later, I was calling up in Massachusetts, and I stayed at his house, and he was showing me a record. Her smile wakes me up in the morning and gives me strength to make it. I can't remember the name of the singing call. He said, listen to the instrumental. And Kip started to play with the bass, and he started to play with the treble. And I suddenly heard notes I never heard before, when it was just evenly. And so I learned from Kip to don't just listen to the melody line on the singing call, but listen to some of the other stuff that's going on and mimic that, pick up on that, use those notes, because the melody is there in square dance anyway. And so I had so much respect for him as my idol, that it was great for me to go above and beyond what my dad had taught me. Well, not taught me, drilled into me. Yeah. I used to say to Dad, I said, God, I wish you were a golfer, a famous golfer. Why couldn't you be Arnold Palmer? And I'd have a much better tan, and I'd be way better at golf. Can I tell you a golf story?
Yeah.
Do you play golf, Charlie?
I do play golf, yes, sir.
So if you're a golfer, you appreciate this. I learned to play golf very late in life. I was 55, 60. And my dad didn't play golf, but I loved it so much. When we talk every day, I'm like, oh, Dad, you have got to try golf. He goes, no, it's too slow, blah, blah, blah. But I talked about it so much, he took up golf. So now, Charlie, understand that when I play golf, I play 9 holes. I don't keep score. And if I don't lose more than 4 balls in those 9 holes, that's like hitting hole-in-ones on half of them.
Sure, okay.
That's a good round of golf for me. Number one, it's only a half a round, but it's my round. So Dad was equally as bad as I was. So he comes into Tennessee to do a weekend with me, and he comes in a day early, and we go to play golf. Now, just south of Knoxville, there's a magnificent, it's 3 9-hole courses. So 27 holes.
Okay. And
there's a red, a white, and an orange course, 3 different colors. The red and the white course are any place you played is just like the red and white one. But the orange one is spectacular because, we've got the Smoky Mountains here. So it's right in the heart of the Smoky Mountains, those 9 holes on the orange course. I'm not one who normally looks at sights. I'm not usually fazed. But this one is just breathtaking. 9 holes of gorgeous, gorgeous playing. It doesn't matter how many balls you lose. It's just breathtaking. So my dad and I go to the counter to pay, and I said, can we play we're only going to play 9 holes. Can we play the orange course? And he said, no, you really don't want to go on that. I just put 8 guys on there. so I looked at Dad and I said, Dad, do you care if we wait a little while? He goes, no, what do I care? I'm here with you. So it just so happens that the first hole was straight down. So you can see from the tee all the way out 300 yards to where the green is. You can see the whole thing. So the 8 guys, they hit their first ball. They go down and they hit their second ball. So now Dad and I, we can go because they're going to be on the green, but no, not going to be a factor. Charlie, we never caught the 8 guys.
Okay.
That's how bad we are. So anybody who played golf's like, wait, how did the 2 of you not catch up to the 8 guys at some point? We never caught them.
Well, when I get up around Knoxville, I'd love to go play with it because we seem like we play on about the same level. If I leave the course with more balls than I went with, because I went and found other ones,
don't you love that?
That is a good day.
That's a win-win.
It is. I got my wife into it. She likes looking for them more than me. I went and bought the sticks so I can go into the water and get them. So yeah, that's a good day if I come back with more than I left with.
Oh my God. I worked for a bank during the day, and I'm always uncomfortable when I go with a client to play golf because I thought, man, if you think I bank anywhere like I play golf, I make it clear to them that, hey, I'm going to take you to play golf. We're only going to play 9 holes. We're not keeping score. This is just fun. And it works. But like you, if I find 2 or 3 balls, I'm like, oh my God. It's like I won the lottery.
Yeah.
I know just how you feel.
Well, Mr. Kopman, we've been going for a little over an hour.
I just wanted to beat Justin Russell's time. That's all that mattered to me. I think you went 46 minutes with Russell.
Okay.
And I called him. I said, Justin, here's the only thing that matters to me. I said, I don't think I'm going to go an hour 12 like Tony, but I just want to beat your 46 minutes is all that matters to me. So.
Well, I will say this: we could go another 2 hours, but my wife would probably have issue with me if I don't get something to eat. So I would love to do this again. Hopefully, I know you're going to be here. We didn't get to talk about it. You're going to be here in Atlanta in about 3 days. Down doing a weekend with Hotlanta on Saturday.
And maybe I'll see you in August.
What's that?
Maybe I'll see you in August at the Tennessee
Absolutely.
State.
I'm going to be up there for the Tennessee State, and hopefully we can run into each other somewhere else along the line. If I even get up there, maybe if Justin will have me come up around that area, we can all go play some golf, and love to do that.
Does Justin play?
I don't know. Even if he doesn't, he's probably only a couple of strokes behind us at that point. So now let me ask, are you left-handed or right-handed?
I got to tell you this one funny story.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I don't mean to.
No.
Here you thought we were only going to talk about square dance calling. So again, a different time. I'm playing with my dad. It comes in a different weekend, and I'm lefty. So this is the second time I played with my dad, and you know this. You want to impress your dad, and whatever you do, you want him to think the world of you. So the 2 of us are playing, and there happen to be a twosome behind us that are just waiting. They're not with us. They're just waiting in their golf cart. So I go first, and of course I'm lefty. I'm lining up on the right side of the ball, and I go to swing as hard as I freaking can, and I miss the ball. Totally. I look down, and the freaking thing is sitting there. So this real Southern guy behind me says, I know what your problem is. You're standing on the wrong side of the ball. I say, I don't think I could do any worse on the other side. So, sorry. That just came across when you mentioned
Well, no, that works out good. If I forget, bring my clubs because I am left-handed.
There you go.
Yep. So, in a rarity, my brother, who's about a year and a half younger than me, he's also left-handed. He is the actual golfer in the family, really good. And so we go out, and so every now and then he's good enough that he buys new clubs on a regular basis. So he always gives me his hand-me-downs, which are really good.
Oh my God!
So, matter of fact, if we do get to play, when you look at the bag, if it says B Petrie, that's because my brother's name's Barry, and I've got his bag.
Can't you
Mr.
just
Kopman,
white out the inside of the bean?
I thought about just taking it's a blue bag, just taking a blue marker and going over
Yeah.
it. So,
Charlie, I really enjoyed meeting you. I enjoyed
sir,
it. I'm
it has
sorry
been
I
my
talked your ear
pleasure.
off.
No, that is awesome. That, like I said, we talked before a little while, and I told you this came out of meeting Sandy Bryant and talking to friends of mine, Tom Miller and Ted Lazat, about a year ago, and it was about stories and funny stories, and we've never had the opportunity to speak before. I couldn't be happier. I mean, this is exactly what I'm looking for. We talked a little bit about square dancing, but we talked a lot about you, and that's what I wanted. And so I certainly look forward to seeing you in person, and maybe we can have some scotch after a dance one night and talk about it.
In
Because like yourself, I am a scotch guy, a whiskey guy.
I love it. I
so
love it. And we both have preemie grandkids. So
we
we
do,
share the
and
same.
you're a fan of the SEC because I see your Tennessee football back there.
Yeah, but we
so
don't
we
do
can
well
say,
against Georgia. Sorry.
well, you did it one time when you had Peyton Manning, but yeah, that was other times.
That's been a little while ago, though, isn't it?
Yes, sir, it has. It has. Well, I
Thank you,
won't call you
Charlie.
sir, Steve. It has been my pleasure. I will talk to you soon. And I definitely would like to schedule probably in about another 2-3 months to do this all over again, and we'll just take off from you playing golf in Knoxville and talk some more about it.
I love it. That's great. Best to you, and really enjoy your grandson.
Absolutely, sir. You have a good night.
You
We'll
too.
talk to you. Bye-bye.